Good evening, everyone. My name is Stephanie Martineau. I'm the Director of Events here at the McDonough School of Business, and I'd like to welcome you all to the 2020 Hariri Symposium. This is the second year that we're using this arrangement, very similar to a TED-style format for the symposium. We received 18 terrific applications, and we have a wonderful evening in store for you all. We'll hear from 4 members of our community tonight. Each are going to share their story, and we'll take a few questions from the audience. We encourage you to hang on to any lingering questions you might have and to seek out our participants at the reception. It's now my pleasure to introduce Dean Paul Almeida. Dean Almeida is a professor of strategy who's been a part of Georgetown for 20 years. He's a Georgetown parent, a true innovator, and an inspirational leader. Please join me in welcoming Dean Almeida.
Good evening, everyone. I've actually been here 24 years, 5 months, and about 22 days. But welcome to Georgetown McDonough School of Business for our annual Hariri Symposium, named after the late Rafiq B. Hariri, the former Prime Minister of Lebanon, a dedicated supporter of education around the world, and a Georgetown parent. Next month marks the 15th anniversary of the tragic attack on his motorcade that cut short the life of this great man, who believed in the power of education. Mr. Hariri went to school to be a teacher, but then changed to the construction industry, where he became a very successful businessman. This enabled him to support numerous educational causes, starting with the Hariri Foundation, which he founded in 1979 to help Lebanese students attend colleges all over the world. Just as Georgetown University was established to educate the future leaders of a brand new America, Mr. Hariri hoped his support of Lebanese students would allow his country to emerge from civil war with strong leaders for generations to come. As a Georgetown parent, Mr. Hariri was a generous supporter of the university and served on the Parents Advisory Council at the McDonough School of Business. In 1996, the university awarded him an honorary degree in celebration of his work to advance education and opportunity for the underprivileged. I would like to recognize Rafiq Bizri and Christiane Buck of the Hariri Foundation, who are in attendance this evening. Thank you for being here. And thank you for all you do to continue the legacy of Mr. Hariri. To begin, we have a wonderful program of 4 TED-style talks from students representing our undergraduate and executive MBA programs, as well as faculty member Doug Holladay, on the topic of "I made the difficult decision to do what's right when." In a world when it's not always easy to do the right thing, we continuously find our Hoya community stepping up to make a difference. We hope you will draw strength and inspiration from tonight's speakers for the time you also will be called upon to make difficult choices. Thank you, Lula, Calvin, Doug, and Anna, for sharing your very personal stories with us tonight. I would also like to thank the other members of our community who submitted proposals to speak for their willingness to share something of themselves. One of the most wonderful things about our community across all our programs is that our students learn from each other. And this is something very special about Georgetown McDonough. And may I say, as a faculty member, we also learn from you. Before we begin, I would like to thank the team behind this event, starting with the Director of Events, Stephanie Martineau, and our Associate Dean and Chief Marketing Officer, Chris Comas. They were supported by a team of colleagues in reviewing the proposals and interviewing the students, including Assistant Director of MBA Programs, Emily Van der Lind, Director of Corporate and External Partnerships, Sean McGilly, and Senior Assistant Dean of the Undergraduate Program, Manisha Amani. This was sure to be another memorable Hariri Symposium. So once again, welcome.
Awesome. Thank you, Dean Almeida. I'd now like to introduce our first presenter of the evening, Aluwet Deng. Aluwet is a junior, double majoring in finance and international business studies with a regional focus in Africa. She also double minors in creative writing and entrepreneurship. As a South Sudanese woman, she strives to empower the world through her story and to show people how she's been able to find successes despite the hardships she went through as a refugee in America. She's currently on the path to obtaining a law degree in international trade law and is a co-owner of Sun-Kissed Skincare. Please join me in welcoming Aluwet.
Good evening, everybody. Today, I would like to tell you a story about a little girl who decided to dream in America, to dream past her circumstances. And I hope in this story you can see that dreams are more than mere fantasies. Dreams can be so powerful that they shape your current life. In 1999, my family came to the United States as refugees of the Sudanese Civil War. The war had broke out in 1983 between the northern Muslims in the north and Christians in the south, indigenous Christians in the south. And during the war, many Sudanese fled the country, east, north, south, west. My family fled north to Egypt. But my father wasn't able to come with us because he was politically involved. So my mother took all 7 of her children and fled to Egypt in hope of getting safety and opportunity. And in 1998, I happened to be born, the youngest of the 8 children. As you can imagine, life was difficult for refugees in Egypt. Not only being non-Arab, but also non-Muslim, it was difficult. And to this day, I can really tell you guys that my mother is one of the strongest women I know. And coming to America was difficult for us. We came in 1999 through the help of a relief service, and we ended up in Salt Lake City, Utah. Transitioning was difficult. My mother had to find 2 jobs to help aid the supplemental income that she got from welfare. My 3 older siblings were forced to get jobs as well to help support the family and feed the many mouths that were in the house. My house was a full house. My other siblings also had difficulties transitioning. They immediately had to get into learning English as a second language classes. And also, they talked to me about how they were bullied and ridiculed for their strange accents and cultural mannerisms. And there I was, the youngest of the 8 children. Now, I didn't go through what my siblings went through, or even what my mom went through. But as I got older, I began to observe and see the struggles that they were going to. I remember seeing my mom cry day in and day out because she was struggling to even feed us. I remember having bread and sugar water for dinner. Yeah, life was difficult. And at a young age, I remember wanting to help my mom, to help her wipe her tears away. I didn't want to see her cry anymore. So at the age of 5, I asked her, "Mom, do I have a father?" Being the Sudanese woman that she was, she said, "Yes, of course you have a father." And she told me all about him. She told me how he was into politics and how he studied law, and that's all I needed to hear. From there, I told her, "You know what, Mama? I'm gonna be a famous lawyer too." And she told me, "My lastborn, if you just focus in school, you can do it." And so that's what I did. I strove in school because that's what I had to hold on to. My dream of becoming a famous lawyer was going to happen unless I made the decision to dream. So that's what happened. I made the difficult decision to do what's right when I decided to dream past my circumstances. Yes, my family was poor and we didn't have much, but I was determined to become this famous lawyer. And so in March of 2017, I got into Georgetown University. And coming to Georgetown University has been one of the biggest successes of my life. To this day, I still pinch myself and say, God, how did I get here? And while at Georgetown, I got into the business school. And being in the business school, I really wanted to find a way to align my academic interests with my want and desire to help people around the world, especially back home in South Sudan. So I got into entrepreneurship. And, entrepreneurship wasn't the most popular amongst my peers who wanted to go into a more corporate setting. No offense to them. Yes, go corporate America. You can still invoke change from within. But yeah, I decided to dream past my circumstances at that point again, where everybody else was going on a different path, and I decided to dream of being one of the only women in the world to help solve the world's biggest developmental issues. I decided to become a social entrepreneur, and I co-own Sunke Skincare, a 100% natural and eco-friendly skincare line that focuses on conservation and social outreach. We started in 2019, and we also plan to partner with farmers from South Sudan and the Bahamas. And while being an entrepreneur, I've also had to dream. I've had to go into uncharted territories, take on a big amount of risk, and say, okay, I'm gonna make money as an entrepreneur. And I also had to see myself being the key person to solve other people's issues and doing it well. So looking back at my story and the circumstances I grew up in, I could have easily let my circumstances limit me. I could have decided to just slide through life. But see, I decided to dream. At a very early age, I decided that I was going to be the famous lawyer that I told my mom I was going to be. And you see, life is difficult. But if you learn to master life, life will give you an expected end. So moving forward, as I finish my schooling and excel entrepreneurially and get the most out of what life has to offer me, I'm going to make the decision to keep on dreaming. Because see, dreaming is a cognitive decision. You have to want to dream. So I want to leave you with two questions. There's a world out there waiting for you. Are you going to decide to let your circumstances limit you? Or are you going to dream? Can you envision your future? Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing your story. It's very inspiring, and congratulations for all your achievements. I would love to learn a little bit more about the path from where you started your story to where you are now. How did you do it? How did you move the world up and down to be here and accomplish so much?
Yeah. Thank you for your question. So a big part of it was dreaming, but then it took doing, right? So growing up in Salt Lake City, Utah, in a predominantly Caucasian area, I was one of the few black girls to go into different spaces. And so I went to a Catholic school ever since kindergarten all the way up until now. And so I really had to work hard. It meant like staying up really late at night, studying, taking the most difficult courses, trying to get my foot in the door in places where I traditionally wasn't welcomed. And from there, my ability to excel academically really caught on to people. And so even coming into Georgetown University, growing up without a father and then also having my mother leave halfway through, I had to really, really just research things, really ask, because I saw that, being a part of the marginalized community is one disadvantage, right? But I wasn't gonna let that disadvantage stop me from maybe one day being able to tell my story and empower other little girls or other people around the world who maybe come from a different marginalized community but also want to walk in that path. So I had to dream, but then I also had to do. And doing took a lot of grit, but I was able to do it. Thank you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Aluwet. Now I'd like to introduce our second speaker of the evening, Calvin Doss. Calvin is a senior studying OPM and management. He is a designer, a business student, an entrepreneur, and a researcher who really likes building things. Calvin has worked on projects such as designing and constructing a laser-cut vending machine to a research paper on the perspectives of hundreds of CXOs around the world on how data and the ethics surrounding it will impact the business world. Because of this, he has dedicated his undergraduate career to learning more about how to make dreams possible. Join me in welcome Calvin to the front.
I'd like to begin with a question. Who here has a work best friend? Please raise your hand. All right, about half the room. So for those who don't know or don't have a work best friend, they are the person who has your back no matter what at work. They are the person who understands when you want to rant about something going on in a different department in a way that your friends and family and random acquaintances wouldn't be able to. Now, I'm really sad that you don't have a work best friend, but don't worry, you're about to meet mine. This is Sam. No, this is not her real name or her real picture. This is the cool mom from Mean Girls, which is the energy that she brought to the room. At the time I met Sam, I was a teenager, and Sam was in her late 20s, early 30s. And I didn't think we were going to be friends. But despite that, she understood every reference, every meme, every joke that I made, and I found myself becoming surprisingly close to someone who was almost a decade and a half older than I was. You see, Sam and I were hired at a medium-sized startup that was just about to go through a huge stage of growth. However, we came in a little after intake, so we spent all of our orientation together. That means getting our laptops, figuring out email, trying to find the right person in HR to submit documents. And throughout that time, I found myself becoming really, really tight with Sam. But it's really important to note that I was simply an intern and Sam was a senior manager. So there was a bit of a distance between us. So to kind of give you an idea of our relationship, and yes, that is me at the age of 5, because that's how I felt, kind of jumping into the business world for the first time. Sam was the first person, and this is incredibly important, the first person to tell me where the best bathroom in the office was. It changed my life. She would enable my Uber Eats addiction, not to the satisfaction of my mother, because it was an unpaid internship, so Uber Eatsing was not looked upon very well, but we did it anyway. We would Slack each other all the time, not about work, just jokes and you know, messing about. But most importantly, Sam was a mentor. She was there when I wanted to find out more about how to progress in my career, what skills I needed to invest in to become a suitable candidate for the big companies that I wanted to work for. And in return, being the resident Gen Z, I would help her when her email wouldn't sync or when a projector wouldn't work. It was a mutually beneficial relationship. So one day, I opened up iMessage to text Sam, and I saw this. Obviously, Sam was in the middle of sending me a text at the same time I was about to text her. So I patiently waited, and then all of a sudden it disappeared. And then it came back again. And for whatever reason, it felt like the start to like a really bad breakup of not knowing what Sam was going to tell me. So I bit the bullet and I said, okay, hey, what's up? What's going on? And Sam tries to type again. It disappears. And then finally she says, I need to speak with you urgently. Can you meet me in a meeting room? So of course my heart sinks because, you know, when someone says I need to talk or we need to talk, your mind immediately goes to the worst place. So I walk over, 3 shots of espresso in my bloodstream, so obviously not good with the anxiety. I go over to this meeting room and I'm waiting inside, and Sam comes in with a completely different energy to what I usually expect from her. Instead of this lively, bubbly, gung-ho self, she comes in stone cold. I was thinking, my mind's racing. What have I done wrong? What could possibly have led to Sam being so upset with me? And then all of a sudden, Sam's eyes start tearing up. And then Sam starts crying. And then Sam starts sobbing. And in between sobs, she tells me, Calvin, I've messed up. I've made a mistake, and I need your help. So there I was, a teenager, without the skill set to deal with this extremely emotional situation, with someone who I look up to, someone who has been a guiding light for me, asking me for help. She says, I accidentally deleted some crucial data, and I need you to take the blame. Of course, I am shocked. She says, you're an intern, so you'll have other opportunities, but I'm a senior manager. If I get fired from this job, I lose a salary that I need to pay off my mortgage, to put food on the table. You'll be fine. You'll be able to continue forward. And I think to myself, okay, yes, these are all valid points, but is it the right thing to do? So I'm presented with these two options. I can either take the fall, Sam keeps her job, but I do so by compromising my ethics. Or she takes the fall, I keep my job, but I lose a friend. In this situation, please raise your hand if you would choose option A. So everyone would choose option B? Oh, option A would be the top one, and then option B would be the one underneath. Okay, so I decided that I didn't like either of these options, and I found another way. I told Sam, okay, we've got a couple hours before this really gets out of hand. I will take the fall for you if we can't fix it in the next couple hours. So after going to IT and posing many hypothetical questions, we discovered that there is a backup. It's a very easy problem to solve, and crisis averted in 2 hours. Afterwards, Sam came up to me and said, I'm so sorry I put you in that position. I don't know what I was thinking. I was just so afraid. It's from this particular experience that I learned 3 really important things. Fear turns us into animals. When you're backed into a corner and you don't know what to do, it may seem like there are only 2 options, fight or flight. But I can guarantee you, in these situations, there is going to be a 3rd option, a 4th option, a 5th option. You don't have to pick what the ultimatum gives you. You can choose your own path. The second takeaway I had was risks. What is the worst that could possibly happen? Given the situation, given how it was so easy to fix, you can imagine how silly Sam felt that she asked me to take the fall for something so minor when she could have owned up and fixed the problem just as quickly. And which brings me to my third point, doing the right thing. The reason why I hesitated in this particular situation was because Sam was my friend. But given another situation where it was an acquaintance or someone I didn't know as well, I'd like to think that I would still do the right thing and help them. And if I was ever in Sam's situation, that I would do the right thing and own up to my mistake. At the end of the day, business is personal, and you need to have compassion in order to be able to be successful. Thank you very much. Yeah, sure. What's your status with Sam nowadays? Sorry? Your status with Sam nowadays? Oh, we're like still good friends. Yeah. I think it was not only a formative business experience, but also a formative personal experience. After that particular incident, it really made me think about putting myself in the other person's shoes, just because it may not seem right to me or it doesn't make sense to me. It can definitely make sense from their perspective. And at the end of the day, we're all human, as much as we'd like to pretend we aren't. So, yeah. Any other questions? To be 100% honest, no. I don't know. I haven't figured it out yet. I doubt many people have. I guess the only advice I could give is take a step back sometimes and really look at all your options. Do you really have only 2 options? You'll rarely find that that's the case. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, good.
Awesome. Thank you, Calvin. Next up, we'll hear from Professor Doug Holladay. Doug is an active private equity investor and executive in residence here at Georgetown McDonough. He's the founder and director of Path North, an organization dedicated to promoting discussions of meaning and purpose among leaders and executives. He previously worked at Goldman Sachs in New York and at the White House under Chief of Staff James A. Baker, later serving at the State Department as a special ambassador to South Africa. Please join me in welcoming Doug to the front.
Thank you. Thank you both. You're awesome. I have a friend from a prominent family, and he said this to me one time. He said, we're all born into someone else's story. Now think about that. We're all born into someone else's story. Everyone here, you didn't ask to be born in the family you were and the influences you had, as we talked about here, but that's really important. So here he was, my friend. He was at Stanford as a sophomore. He was studying economics, and he started thinking, the only reason I'm here is because of my last name. His name is Peter Buffett. His father is Warren Buffett. So he's there pondering this situation. Here I am. I don't belong. I hate economics, but I have this dilemma. Then his father famously announced that he wasn't leaving the 3 kids anything. And he said, that sucked. So he was really even more down about his life. And then his mother called about 3 months later and said, Peter, I've got some news for you. Your grandfather died. That's not the good news, but your grandfather died and left you $92,000. That day, Peter packed his car in Palo Alto and started driving to New York City, where he decided he could fund himself for 2 years as a musician. He eventually did part of the score for Dances with Wolves and some other pretty well-known things. So my story is not as dramatic as that, but for me, it was really important. So I was a freshman, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. I was a recruited athlete, was playing lacrosse. I didn't know what a fraternity was. So somebody said, you need to join a fraternity. Some of you probably don't even know what that is, but it's where guys hang out and get drunk, basically. So I had this epiphany before I went to college that I was going to live this different kind of life, a very spiritual life. So I said, I'm not going to drink. I'm not going to do any of these crazy things. So I decided to pledge this fraternity. They have a night called Hell Night, right? So I'm a typical suck-up. My whole life, I just did whatever everybody did to get along, to be popular, to succeed, all these things. So here I am at this Hell Night, 3:30 in the morning. They saved me for last. They're trying to get me to get drunk, do all kind of crazy things. I don't know where it came from, but at 3:30, I had a moment of clarity. I said, guys, if I have to change fundamentally who I am, I'm out of here. So I walked out, and an older person in the fraternity, a friend of mine, was there. I broke down in tears. We go back to my dorm, Alexander dorm. I'm so depressed. He said, this is a terrible day for you. And I thought of what Homer Simpson said, this isn't the worst day of your life, just the worst day so far. And it was the worst day. So I'm thinking about, transferring schools, joining the witness protection program. I'm like, you're so humiliated. You remember what it's like to be a freshman, 18 years old? Hey, remember that? You're so self-conscious, it's terrible. And I just thought my life is over. So I'm there, sitting on the bed, talking to this guy. And about 45 minutes later, there's a knock on my door. And it's the worthy master. They have these exalted titles. He's the president of the fraternity. They said, Doug, would you come out here? So there were 60 brothers arrayed out there, total silence at 4:15. And they said, we just want to apologize. It's amazing that you would do that, and you're exactly the kind of person we want in here. Now, I got to tell you, this was an exception to my life. But it did change me in some fundamental ways. So let me just give you one example of how it has changed me. And it's 3 years ago, right after Donald Trump was elected president, a bunch of members of Congress, about 30 of them, said, could we meet with you to talk about a reformer I know something about, a guy named William Wilberforce who abolished the slave trade. Some of you know about him. So I've done a lot of research on him and really think he's an amazing guy. And I wrote a monograph, and some of them, it inspires them because he was really a principled person who did the right thing to abolish the slave trade. So I was there, I talked to him about it. At the end, one of these, and it was Democrat and Republican, one of the Republican members of Congress said, so Doug, I want to change. What do you think of us? And I said, really? You really want me to tell you? I think you're intelligent, you're high-minded, but you have a problem of context. The problem in the Congress of context is this. It requires all this money to be elected. To really move ahead in life, you have to make all kind of compromises. And by the end, you don't even know why you're here and what you're doing. So one of the guys says, you don't understand, obviously. We got to do that to get into a position where we can be really influential. And I said, well, how did that work for Speaker Boehner? He was the Speaker of the House before Paul Ryan. And I said, I don't think that ever comes. And they said, well, what would you do, smart guy? I said, you want to know the answer? For me, I said, why don't you just do the right thing and get fired? They said, what do you mean? I said, if you're a Democrat, why don't you pair up with a Republican? You know the stuff we need to do in our country. Do you want to sit on the porch with your kids someday in the rocking chair and just tell them you were in the Congress? Or do you want to say, I was defeated because I stood for something? And it was pretty interesting. Then I said to them, it really got really interesting then. So I said, how many of you remember a guy, the Attorney General during the time of Richard Nixon, Elliot Richardson? 2 out of 35 congressmen even knew who he was. They said, why is that important? I said, he resigned because Nixon asked him to fire Archibald Cox, who was a special prosecutor. I remember Elliot Richardson. I don't remember a lot of other attorney generals because he did the right thing. So I was going to read you a text that I wrote to somebody who's my priest over here. I said, you think I should do that? He said, you don't want to get political. But I was going to read you a text. One of the defenders of the president on the floor of the House is a very prominent lawyer, and he was, I wrote him a pretty straightforward text a couple days ago and said, I can't believe you're defending the indefensible. And so I say all that is when you do take some stand, it kind of gives you the courage to start doing it over and over again. But I'd close with this. For me, the biggest person I need to critique is me. There was a great thing that happened in London in the 30s. They asked 100 prominent people, what's wrong with the world? And they all wrote long dissertations and all kind of thing. G.K. Chesterton wrote his answer on one postcard. What's wrong with the world? I am. So I don't go around trying to fix everybody else. My first project is me, and I'm not doing a real good job with that. But that is the first project when you're going to really try to stand for some things. You got to constantly keep looking at your own soul and heart. Thank you.
Questions will be held at the reception for Doug. Okay, thank you, Doug. So last but not least, we'll hear from Anna Rathmann. Anna is a proud member of the Executive MBA program at Georgetown McDonough. She's also the director of the Great Plains Conservation Foundation, where she uses her experience philanthropy and conservation to ensure natural habitats in Africa thrive while the communities who rely on them are supported. Anna began her career in conservation as a United States National Park Ranger in Yellowstone National Park, and later spent more than a decade with the National Geographic Society here in Washington. Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for the whistle. So I have to start off by saying thank you. And what an honor it is to be here tonight, to be sharing this story with you. A little bit of quick background. This is the first time I've ever shared this story in a public setting, so that was kind of a difficult decision. But I'm very honored to be here, so thank you to Georgetown University and to the McDonough School of Business and to the Hariri Symposium for having me. So I made the difficult decision to do what's right when I decided to stay back on a deserted island so that others could get back to shore safely. And I know that some of you saying that, you're conjuring up images that we've all had, these kind of daydreams of wouldn't it be wonderful to be stranded on a deserted island, and who would we want to be with, and what sort of food would we want to have? Or you're coming up with images like this, and poor Tom Hanks in Castaway, he's on this island by himself, his only friend, this volleyball he names Wilson. So I have to say, though, having lived through the experience, it wasn't really like either of those. And it turned out different than I expected. Let's see if it goes forward. So a little bit of background about me. You heard earlier, I have had the incredible great fortune of having opportunities to lead international expeditions all over the world. Some of these places have been very remote. Some of them have been very complicated expeditions, and this was one of them. We had been spending about 3 weeks in Papua New Guinea. Papua New Guinea is an amazing place. The diversity of culture is absolutely unparalleled. The snorkeling and scuba diving is phenomenal. It's north of Australia, so it's part of that kind of Great Barrier Reef marine ecosystem, so you can imagine it's one of these just absolutely spectacular places. So the night before, my colleague and I, the other guide, we started talking with the group that we were leading. And it was clear that there were those who wanted to scuba and there were those who wanted to snorkel. So we decided to split them up. He would be taking the scuba divers, and I would be responsible for the much larger group of snorkelers. Fast forward to the morning. We now find ourselves down on the beach, and it looked exactly like this. In fact, I made it a point. When I was at National Geographic, my first job was fact-checking, so I'm very cognizant of making sure that I get things that are right. This was actually taken on the beach where we launched from. So the scene looked very similar to this. And in fact, that volcano in the background, it's an active volcano. There's just another fact to add to the story. So we launch from this beach. We're on kind of a small day trip sort of boat. And off we go, and out into the ocean. And the passage is going to take us about an hour and a half to get through. As part of the passage, we're going to go through a busy shipping canal. And so if you can imagine, there's going to be boats of all shapes and sizes, everything from these kind of small local fishing boats to large container ships. And then once we get out into the ocean, we're going to come upon something like this. And this was an island that looked very similar to the island where we found ourselves. White sand beaches. I mean, this is the kind of island you have your daydreams about. This is where you want to be with your bucket of Coronas and your limes. And, it's here. So we find ourselves here, and there's the palm trees and the blue ocean, and it did not disappoint. Papua New Guinea snorkeling is phenomenal. The corals are beautiful. The fish are colorful, and the abundance of life was amazing. So we had this, it was a great day. It was by all stretch of the imagination a wonderful day. We had this beautiful picnic lunch out on a beach that looked like this. And then the guests went out for another round in the afternoon, and I found myself there, and one of the local guides who had joined us approaches me. And he says, "Ma'am, we need to talk." I think it was Calvin who said, when someone says we need to talk, that's always kind of a sign. And he says the conditions are changing out there. The winds have picked up, and what has gone from being this beautiful glass, serene blue is now looking something more like this. The winds had picked up, there were white caps, and that passage between that small isolated island and back to the shore was going to prove to be very treacherous. So we needed to come up with some ideas of what to do. We talked it over. We came up with a couple of scenarios, and then we sought outside advice. We called back on the one piece of communication device that we had, this one rinky-dink cell phone that he had been keeping in a plastic bag so that it would stay dry and sand wouldn't get into it. So we called back to shore. We're communicating with our colleagues who are still back there. We're telling them about what we're seeing. We're telling them about the conditions. We're talking about the dynamic of the group that we were with. There were several family units in our group. And we came up with the solution. And it was a difficult one, but it was very clear that it was the right one. We were going to have to divide the group. And that meant that some would be going back on the boat, and others would remain on the island and await rescue. Now, the reason for that is relatively straightforward. The boat, we needed it to ride high in the water, because as the waves would crash over it and the taking on water, the potential of capsizing, especially in that passage, was just too high, and it wasn't something that any of us were willing to take or to risk. But what that meant was we were going to be dividing up family units, and there would be those of us who would have to remain, not knowing when we would be leaving. So I can remember talking with the local guide and saying to him, and so now we've gotten off the phone and we're sitting there just coming up with our plan, and I said, "All right, I want you to have the boats ready. When I communicate this to the group, I want to be ready to take action and to go." Because to further complicate things, it was late afternoon. The sun was setting, and crossing through that busy channel at night in a small touring boat without adequate lights was going to be exceptionally dangerous and not something we were willing to do. So he went down to the boat, and he was talking with the boatmen, and they're collecting all the things, and I go and I start going around the island and collecting everyone. And I told them, "I want you to come down to the beach. I have something that we need to talk about, and I want to do it together. I want you all to hear this information at the same time." So we come down to the beach, and I can remember standing there. My back is to the ocean. They're looking out, and you can imagine the emotion. They've just had this wonderful day. This is kind of a capstone of the trip. They've had this beautiful day of snorkeling and a great lunch, and here we are at this beautiful place, and I'm now telling them about the circumstances that we're facing. And I told them we're going to be splitting up. I'd like to have all the women get on the boat, and whatever men feel comfortable, I'd like to ask them to remain on the island with me. And the energy went from being one of fun and vacation and this kind of idealism of paradise to now their gazes are on the sand, looking down at their feet. And we stood in silence there for a few seconds. And I broke the silence. I said, "It's time to go. We're leaving now. Come with me." And I turned, now facing the ocean, and walked down to the boat. And they followed me. I grabbed a hold of the hull of the boat. The local guide grabbed the other side, and we're steadying the boat as it's rocking, steadying it as best as we can to ensure that people can get on. And I remember making kind of small talk with people trying to keep it light, trying to keep the levity there, to inspire confidence with, small talk and making sure that they had on the life preservers properly. And, as I was pushing, the final kind of thing I remember saying, as we're pushing the boat out and he's getting ready to start the engine, I remember saying something to the effect of, don't eat all of the dinner. Save us a plate or two. We'll see you soon. And then off they went. The engine started, and out into the waves they went. And I remember turning, walking back up onto the beach, and stopping in the shallows. And the waves are crashing against my legs, and the wind is blowing, and I'm standing there literally waving and smiling, doing this kind of thing. And as the boat, they wave back at me, and as the boat gets out, and it's now far enough away that I'm relatively sure they can't see my facial expressions, I let my smile fall. And that was when it sunk in, that right decision, that absolutely right decision to stay behind was coming with significant personal risk. And to add to that, I was also responsible for those who had chosen to stay behind with me. I turned around, I walked back up to the beach, and it's funny. Those few who had remained, we all dispersed on the island. There wasn't any talking, there wasn't small talk, there wasn't levity. It was everyone in their own thoughts, watching as the sun is setting. And we know that as that sun gets closer to the horizon, there's going to be less chance of any rescue. And we're all in silence. I was sitting on a piece of driftwood, and just in my own thoughts, thinking about what in the world had I gotten myself into here. And suddenly the local guide, the one who had stayed back with me, he comes up, and I see that he's got his cell phone in his hand. It's out of the little Ziploc bag, so that's a good sign. And he goes, they're coming. They've sent someone, they're coming. And the mood again shifted 180 degrees, going from this kind of somber of, thinking about how are we going to make this work? We just have the leftovers from lunch. We've got a couple bottles of water, no shelter, to now being this eager anticipation that somebody was coming. Well, what had happened was when we called and we were conferring with those on the land, that had set into motion a whole bunch of actions. Where we had launched from was a small village where there are no strangers. Everyone's connected. And when one of the maids at the lodge where we were staying heard about our little drama out on the ocean, she went to her husband, who was a fisherman. He had come in early that afternoon, and she went and shared about what was happening. He grabbed fuel, and he went out to save us. He risked his own personal safety and security to take one of those little boats that I showed you earlier, coming out into these conditions alone as the sun is setting, crossing that busy shipping canal to save a bunch of strangers. It's that kind of selflessness, it's that kind of bravery for which I'm ever indebted, that someone would do that. And I can remember when he finally came into view. And the sun was getting very low now, and we knew that we had about an hour, maybe an hour and a half crossing ahead of us. He finally comes into view, and we all sprint off of the island, the few of us who were there. I was the only woman, and I was joined by a couple of men. And we sprint off of the island, and we jump in the boat, and off we go. And the fisherman is going to try to make that passage as short as possible. He's going to cut off as many minutes as he can, revving that engine. And we went out, and it was a difficult passage. I can remember going up on the waves and then them crashing down. There were several times when, despite holding onto the hull, getting tossed into the center of the boat, the waves crashing over us, it was tough. It was uncomfortable, but we made it. And as we're getting closer to shore, the sea starts to get calmer, the winds start to die down, and this pod of dolphins comes out of nowhere. And they're now following us, and they're jumping, and they start doing flips and acrobatics and things that I had only thought trained dolphins knew how to do. It was unbelievable. No sooner had they appeared than they disappear, and we're joined by this school of flying fish, which if you've ever seen flying fish, they're unbelievable. They propel themselves out of the water, spread out their fins, and then they just glide a couple of inches above the water. It is majestic. And as soon as they're done with their flight, they just dive back in and disappear. And as I'm watching this scene, and those final blues and purples of twilight are now fading to black, all of that uncertainty, all of that stress, all of that fear disappeared, just like those flying fish. Thank you. Thank you. Any questions? I was going to start off the talk by saying, spoiler alert, I got off the island, so. Thank you. Thank you.
Fabulous. Let's give one more round of applause for all of our participants. Really great. That concludes our event. We invite you all to stay for our reception and enjoy each other's company. Thank you and have a great evening.